thank you all very much for still being here for this very final lecture, and I hope that I can sort of pick up now from the dragon style, because the last sort of really proper period we had in Norway since the dragon style was the Nordic Neoclassicism, which I'll tell you a little bit about. So I know we're all here today because we share a passion for beauty, and some of you are here because you are actively working towards shaping our surroundings into beautiful and peaceful places, whilst others of you are here to observe and gain new perspectives. So hopefully these proposals or sketches from myself could be of some inspiration. Most of you may be familiar with the period of Nordic Classicism. It was a short period, predominantly between 1910 and 1930s, following from the dragon style, and spanned across Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. The period was not just one of revival, but one of great innovation, refinement, and renewal. The Nordic Classicism was also a continuation of the national romanticism. So early influence of modern ideas helped shape the Nordic style into something pure and stripped back, whilst also retaining the vernacular character and craft. So the buildings in these photos here, they're not pure or neoclassical buildings, they are traditional buildings, where classical principles have been employed to refine the proportion, the syntax, and the detailing. So, for reference, the buildings here are from Høyanger, Oslo, and Bergen. One of the brilliant architects of this period was Magnus Poulsson. He was a Renaissance person in the way that he had an incredible drive and fantasy to interpret and to explore. And one of his key influences was his teacher Herman Schirmer, which you will have heard about from other talks. So the building in this photo from 1917 is located in Bygdøy, here in Oslo, at the Norwegian Cultural History Museum. And it's perhaps more national romantic than classical, but it's certainly got some classical refinement towards it. In 1903, Poulsson and his peer Arnstein Arneberg traveled to Stockholm, where Poulsson made his way to the Nordic Museum. He carried out measure drawings of Norwegian folk art, and his love for Norwegian craft and traditions can clearly be seen. His later drawings on the right, they're very representative of Poulsson's work, and it's worth studying the form, the composition, and the way that vernacular detailing is applied and arranged on his elevations, but also in plan. The photograph to the left here shows Bjølstad in Uppland, and that's one of the rural Norwegian farms that Schirmer would have brought his students to, such as Poulsson, to study, draw, and photograph. The relatively plain house on the right was one of Poulsson's many houses that drew on the traditional architecture that he was so fond of, both through the form, the roof pitch, window arrangement, materials. You can even see the barge boards and the decoration here. The second architect that I'm going to mention is Frederik of Lund. He was a contemporary of Poulsson, but he had a different education. So of Lund trained in Dresden amongst the Baroque and the Rococo, but it was still in England that he found his ideals. He was very much on board with William Morris's passion for craft and artistry, and he also spoke many a time about establishing an association for the promotion of slowness and calm. So even the early 20th century was too hasty for him. And this is of Lund's villa Aschehoug in Bergen. So have a good look at the wide horizontal timber boards, the slate roof, timber casement windows, and the very pronounced English brick chimney. The image on the left here shows a roof detail from the bedroom wing at that same villa Aschehoug. The side wing has a very much more vernacular details than the main body of the house, with smaller leaded windows, more natural stone, and a plainer chimney. Notice also how the large slates are laid along the eaves, a very traditional regional detail for Bergen that of Lund incorporated into several of his buildings in the area. So to study these buildings here through drawing is a very excellent exercise to help us understand how they work in the specific regional setting that they are in. This villa here in Bergen, known as Riber 1, is one of those that Konow Lund in later years reviewed and looked back at with self-criticism, noting that he had done it in a rush, and therefore, even to him, it appeared more dated than what he would have liked. But seen today, with our perspective, the house is nevertheless one of his masterpieces. It's adorned with arts and crafts references, and it very subtly blends the almost medieval entrance area with characteristic and cleverly resolved design features that are also quite innovative once you start looking at the details. In terms of what we can learn from these architects is, take Konow Lund for an example. One of the things that makes his building so recognizable is his approach to detailing. So he carefully selects which elements are to be focal points, and then he emphasizes these by arranging them in a hierarchy and stripping back the spaces between them. So the focus point on the house to the left would be the very steep, hipped gable roof, supported by a wide cornice, typical of Bergen. Thereafter comes the embellished door, followed by 3 windows over them, ever so subtly set back from the facade. And also, rather than a projecting door surround, what Konow Lund does is he cleverly carves it out of the rendered masonry, as you can see here, like a sculptor. To the top right again is the Riber 1 villa from the entrance drive, and the bottom right-hand image is a lovely sketch for an unrealized villa that Konow Lund did, where you might see, or some of you might see at least, how he drew inspiration from Edwin Lutyens in England. I'll move over to some of my own sketches and work and show a couple of my interpretations, and I'll do that by addressing the topic of narrative. So architecture, as we've heard earlier this weekend, is its language, and every building and every element that we design tells a story. Some buildings would be akin to a poor text, a very hastily written note, meant to serve a purpose and be forgotten. Poorly executed, without the pleasure of the reader in mind. A good story, however, need not be long, in the same way as a building does not need to be large or elaborate to be good. What they both need, however, is a narrative and a purpose. My sketch that I've done here is done for an office in a building whose owner is in the fish industry, and this door handle is obviously based around that story. So everything from the handle to the key to the escutcheon all tells a story. So there's minor elements on a grander scale, but narrative is part of every single element. On the subject of storytelling, I would also like to share this design of mine for a small bathhouse. It's got a very simple form, 2 square cubes stacked on top of one another with a hipped roof. But the beauty in it lies in its simplicity. So the decorative elements, the weather vane, the external lighting, the balustrade, down to the doorknob, they all strengthen the narrative of what this building is, what it wants to do, and it's not just applied, but it's woven into the fabric of the building, everything that you touch and use. So buildings like these, for example, they could be just a short, simple poem. They make you stop and think, and they induce delight. This next one here is a proposal for a villa for the Norwegian west coast. Robert Adam here has previously told me about how, as architects, we can use classical architecture like a volume button. You can turn it up, you can turn it down, you can add on to it, you can peel back, and you can do very clever exercises there. And I regard this as a kind of volume speakers on full. You got the colonnades, you got the pavilions, you got a belfry. But here is the same elevation, stripped back. So this exercise of subtracting and adding elements is a very useful tool for us as architects, to find the right balance of the composition. To the right, you'll see some of the design precedents, all of them from Bergen. top and bottom ones are 18th century, and the middle one is from the 1920s. It's got a steep slate roof, 51.5 degrees, and the sprockets are both functional and decorative because they shed water away, and they make the roof sit comfortably onto the building. You'll also see that the pitches of the roof, they gradually decrease the lower down on the building you get, from the roof to the dormers, pediments, and stairs. There is a hierarchy and a symmetry, as well as a few select elements of emphasis. So some simple design suggestions from me would be to start with a plain geometrical form and let the openings in and out of the building be spaced out with proportion and rhythm, but don't be afraid to try and fail, because it's not always down to exact measurements, but your eyes will know when it's right. It's intuition. Also, don't overdo it unless you have a compelling reason to do so and a very generous budget. It's usually more successful to keep a building simple and make sure that the elements of interest that you are adding are done well. On the entrance elevation of this one, it's adorned by some classical elements, such as the door surround and the cornice, intertwined with vernacular detail. So the recessed area of the facade was done to subtly increase the emphasis around the entrance. And much like Konow of Lund has done, the focus is on the chimneys and on the entrance door. Simple as that. Second to the entrance door are the side doors. So the scale and of the various elements is also quite controlled to underline the hierarchy. So you'd see the top of the columns on the door surround lines up with the underside of the cornice. It's all the same order, but it's slightly increased in scale. So we can go in a bit closer on it, seeing it's a plain Doric order, but the cornice is not applied at high level. Another element of delight here is the small festoon over the door. So that's, for me, a slight sort of tongue-in-cheek reference to the early 20th century classicism. You also see the terminating moulding at the top of the door surround actually forms the base of the window above. So where you can combine things and be economical and do it in a clever way, that adds interest. The next one of my buildings is a hunting lodge in the Norwegian mountains. The classical elements here is actually quite similar to that of the previous buildings, but it's in a different vernacular. Here we are in the highlands. It's colder, drier climate, and lots of snow in the winter. The timber paneling is therefore vertical, the roof pitch is lower, and there is more shelter from the snow. It could potentially be a quite strict-looking building, so I've used an ionic order around the loggia to soften that specific area and make it slightly more intimate. Another important consideration is to always use natural materials as far as possible, and to ensure that the appearance of the building reflects not only the location, but also the materials from which it is built. A building made from timber will have very different detailing than that of brick or stucco work. The main body of the building here is enhanced by a slight height difference and a grander detailing, nothing more. It's a hunting lodge, so this is subtly referenced with the fox-hound weather vane in gilt bronze, and another regional detail is the small belfry, with a bell that's just large enough to call to the outskirts of the fields on a quiet day. Much like Poulsson and Konow of Lund, I've also looked to references from historic Norwegian farms when designing this building, and I'm sure you can see similarities, and we'll have a quick look at the entrance elevation as well, with its design precedents. At the top you will see Myttingstua from Ringebu, and below is an entrance portico, again from Bjølstad Gård. And the band of windows over the main entrance is influenced somewhat from Poulsson, but here again there is a balance and a hierarchy, and also the entrance is centered on the building, not on the spaces left between the extension and the end of it. The final one of my buildings today is a proposal for a villa by the fjord, also in west of Norway. And this again has got a very simple shape with 5 bays. The 3 central bays sit somewhat tighter, but not too tight, which can help create focus. Where elements are joined, it's done with purpose and with emphasis. Some of the tools that help me ascertain the proportion and spacing is, for example, the 2 intersecting golden rectangles. So each of the ground floor openings, they're made out of rectangles, with the first floor windows being squares. And each square is set 1 full square from the window below. And to work out these kind of ratios, you sort of switch back and forth between proportional exercises, but also modern building codes, such as the height from floor to a window. The front elevation of this building has an implied order. That is, the columns not expressed, but you can very subtly read the entablature and the pilasters at either the corner of these suggested capitals. You can often tell the consideration that's gone into the design of the building by how you turn a corner. So that's something to always pay attention to, is how you turn the corner both at the base, at the high level. And the elevation to the lower right-hand side faces a sea, so that's therefore sheltered by the lean-to roof with a split, undressed stone cladding. The elevations at the top to the south and east respectively lets the light in and have a slightly more formal appearance compared to that of the other 2. So you'll see a close-up here of the west elevation with some references to Konow Lund on the right. You'll see also that the lean-to is subtly higher than the rest of the plinth, again to shelter from the weather. And as a final close-up here on the east elevation, which is much less exposed, you'll see there's space for a recessed balcony. So rather than that being an entirely separate element, it's been woven into the fabric and into the window arrangement by a shared cornice and a frieze, but no architrave. So as I was already breaking the rules a bit on this one, I thought it'd be fun to joke around by replacing a keystone with an Ionic capital. This might appear a bit kitsch to some of you, but it's nevertheless correctly set out, and it's done to prove a point. My point being that classical architecture is not merely a system of static rules, it's a reminder and a testament that we are humans. And as humans, we progress when we take the opportunity to explore and to have humor. Thank you all.